Benny, you were asked by the First Minister to look at the creation of a Scottish National Investment Bank, or it may not have been called that at the time, it may have been a project. You're an analyst, you're a real thinker about life. What were you thinking when you were asked the question? And it's a mixed audience, and there are some children out there.
To be honest, I was in my office in November, well, maybe October 2017, and I took a call from someone in the First Minister's office saying that the First Minister wanted me to develop an implementation plan for the creation of the first Scottish National Investment Bank. And they asked what my reaction to that was and what did I need to know before I could make my mind up. And I just said, I'll do it, it's fine. That was my answer. And I was reading something the other day, and I can't remember, it's somebody who I hadn't heard of, said that sometimes to get things done, you have to have an irrational belief in your ability to do it. And actually, as we've gone through the process of finding the first chair, we are about to embark on finding the first chief executive. I kind of hope we'll find people that are have got at least that aspect that I've got, which is, this seems something worthy. If I don't do it, who is going to do it? Yeah. So I was very quick to say yes. I was also given the great opportunity to try and work out what it should be. So in some ways it was the answer, what is it, and what will it be, and how big will it be, and what will it achieve, was up for grabs.
Yeah, you weren't being given a blueprint to try and force
in fact,
something.
I was being asked to provide a blueprint. I mean, there is nothing novel about development banks. The first development bank was established in 1948, the KfW in Germany, after the Second World War, in the reconstruction of Europe. That has been at the heart of a lot of the very best things that have happened, especially in the kind of green aspects of the economy in Germany. There's one just being put together just now in the Netherlands, Invest in L. I was yesterday with a whole bunch of development banks in Amsterdam, from Canada, from Finland, all over Europe and Saudi Arabia, Morocco. Fantastic banks, all doing bespoke things for what's needed. And that's what we need to do. We are, as an economy, I think we've got great strengths, but we have low economic growth, full employment. That means we've got a productivity problem. We have a narrow export base. We have got to face into the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution. Economies in transition are often become victims. We know what that's like for those of us that grew up in Scotland in the 70s and 80s. So this is a very important time to get it right. We have a demographic challenge that's greater, but we do have strengths. I mean, one thing, I was the strategy director for Tesco Group for 3 years, and I learned quite a lot about strategy, because that's a sector where if you get it wrong, the customer tell you right away. I mean, the truth of the matter is, in banking, you can get it wrong and nobody notices for a long time. I.e. customer.
PPI.
And so, I learned a lot. And one thing I learned, and it's a pretty obvious, banal thing to say, but it's true, and you need to remember, if you're going to, your strategy requires you to understand how you'll win. Every winner needs a loser. In order to win, you really have got a decent chance if you focus on areas where you have got some natural advantage. Don't just start to say, no point in me saying I want to be a good ballet dancer next week. It's not going to happen.
I've seen you dance.
Well, indeed.
It's a no.
I'm being modest. but we've got to work out what is it about Scotland that gives us natural advantage. Actually, scale is an advantage if we think about it in terms of agility. The university sector we have in Scotland is the envy of the world in terms of its research capability. It's an extraordinary pool of talent and people and knowledge, but we don't move from research into development and then into commercialisation fast enough. But that's a strength. We have another enviable lead in renewables, but not in industrialisation of renewables. So we've got to pick through what it is we can be good at. And the bank, in part, is there to work with other pieces of the government's apparatus to deliver that for Scotland.
Now, one of your recommendations in the output was, and I think you said it quite forcibly, it had to be independent of any government. Is that, how did you arrive at that? And I mean, it might seem obvious, but you were quite pointed in that.
Yeah, no, I think the idea is that there will be a strategic framework developed that will be owned by ministers. So there's one shareholder, Scottish Government, in perpetuity. The idea is it wouldn't become like the Green Investment Bank, that it ultimately gets privatised. So to keep its focus on having the right kind of risk appetite to be additive to what goes on already in the economy, the only way I think that can be delivered is if you have people who are good enough and strong enough. They will only be involved in running the bank as on the board or on the executive if they get the opportunity to have that independence. I think it would have been non-negotiable to get good people if they were going to be told what to do every day. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Whoever's going to be the chair, whoever's going to be the chief executive, will be leaned on by ministers and government. That will happen. But all I can say is we're setting this up to give them maximum protection in that dialogue. It will happen. It's natural.
Well, it's bound to happen,
It's
isn't
bound
it?
to happen. But I think we're setting it out so that operational independence lies at the heart of it.
Yes.
And I have to say, fully supported by the FM, fully supported by ministers generally. An interesting thing with this project, I've spent more time stakeholder managing than I thought I would. It's not the only thing I've been doing, but I've spent a lot of time on that. And with very, very few exceptions, there is incredible support for it. There is support for Scotland to have greater capability in allowing small businesses to scale up. There is this gap, you'll know this better than I do, single figure millions for debt and equity, which is a kind of no man's land. If you want small amounts, you'll get it through a very effective angel network. If you're looking for large amounts to scale up a decent sized business with tens of millions, you'll get it from big investors. But there's this no man's land where there's a kind of tired investor market, and the bank's got to operate there. It's also got to operate in the mission-led projects, which are basically the grand societal challenges around carbon neutrality, around the fourth industrial revolution, around demographic challenges, which require investors to invest with an appetite for risk, even including probably in particular the duration of the investment that banks don't naturally play in.
So it's patient capital.
Yeah.
How do you get round the Treasury then? Because that's somewhere else. And they probably have to give concessions around the funding structures. And then also, is it a bank in terms of a PRA type? How have you danced around that, to use the ballet analogy?
Well, first of all, it isn't really a bank in a sense, so it won't be a deposit-taking institution, at least not for now. The legislation that's gone through unanimously on its first vote a couple of weeks ago is setting up an organisation that will invest. The investment, the balance sheet will come from Scottish Government, which in turn gets its funding through financial transactions from HM Treasury. Initially, we've got two issues that we need to tackle. One is the carrying forward of reserves, which strictly speaking won't be allowed until we get a dispensation from Treasury. We think we'll get that one, but the second dispensation, which is a more challenging one, is to borrow in the wholesale markets and leverage. So KFW is leveraged 19.6 times. EIB is leveraged 3 times. Yeah. But if we're going to have 2 billion on our balance sheet, which is 1.3% of Scottish GDP, if we can get 3 times leverage, then you get up to pretty reasonable numbers that can make a pretty big difference to the Scottish economy.
Yeah, so you end up with about 6 billion available, 8 billion once you're leveraged up, and small investment sizes, that makes a significant difference to that pool of companies caught in the.
I mean, it's interesting because one of the political opponents did make the point that it would be better if it was 20 billion. And having passed my old grade arithmetic, I know that 20 is bigger than 2, but beyond that, I didn't hear another good argument. So, look, my attitude is let's get the 2 out there. Yeah. Let's look for dispensations to leverage it. Let's do a good job and demonstrate what's possible in Scotland. Just to be clear, the bank has gone through its first stage. It will go through its second stage vote in November. Its final stage vote will be in February, March time. It will then have to get state aid approval, albeit the word that must not be said could get in the way, but we think we can see a way through that. And we're obviously building the infrastructure itself. So with a fair wind, the bank will be open fully with in the sort of late spring, early summer. If it misses a deadline on state aid, it'll probably tip over to about this time next year. But it will be quite a historic event.